Hello everybody, hope you are doing well. I'm hoping this will be a fairly quick video, partly because what I'm talking about is a little bit vague, but also because it's the middle of August here in Hong Kong and it's incredibly hot. I have to turn the air conditioning off so I can do a video, otherwise you just hear a loud hum. So here I am fully waistcoated up, hoping that I can do this quickly, but I think I can. So my previous two videos, I've hinted at, I suppose, not really talked about, rules on cross-border data transfer between China and Hong Kong. So what happened was there was a memorandum of understanding signed a couple of months ago now, it's been quite a while ago, that was supposed to allow for the free flow of information between China to Hong Kong and the rest of the GBA. Now the Greater Bay Area, the GBA, it's abbreviated GBA, which always confuses me because I immediately think of Game Boy Advance, showing my nerd credentials probably more than anything else. But it is an area essentially encompasses the southern part of China, including Shenzhen and Hong Kong, into one big economic zone. Really, what will probably be a tech hub. Hong Kong is trying to build a northern tech metropolis as part of this GBA. It's meant to be really an economic powerhouse, one of the big centres of China. One of the places that will be essentially be the equivalent, I would suppose, of Silicon Valley, if you like, only on the border of or within slightly Hong Kong, Shenzhen and the neighbouring regions. There's various things been going on with the GBA initiative, so people can qualify to be lawyers there, people can apply to work there if they've got a university degree in Hong Kong, and it's one of the big things, one of the big initiatives of Xi Jinping. But we have a problem. So at the moment, well, I guess it all came into force fully back in 2021. We have three Chinese data laws. We have the cybersecurity law, the data security law, and the personal information protection law. And you can actually have a read of these. I did a video which I will link to explaining what each involves, but in a very small nutshell, not saying you don't have to watch the video, if you want to transfer data from China to anywhere else, including Hong Kong, which despite being part of China is a separate jurisdiction, you have to jump through various administrative hoops. You have to either get clearance by the Cybersecurity Administration, or you've got to have a certain number of records. You've got to make sure you're not transferring too many important data records, which is like sensitive data. It is a headache, and it's a headache that's kept lawyers very busy, but very busy in that there's not really a big answer. Not very many organizations have been certified for cross-border data transfer out of China, and not many seem to be having it in the future. So there's often a concern that people will get into trouble if they are transferring essentially Chinese data anywhere else in the world. Now, the belief was, and my big hope was, and I kept saying in these other videos, it's going to make life so much easier, that there would be some sort of grandfathering of data arrangement as part of this new, essentially, memorandum of understanding, that they were going to put together a framework of rules, and essentially those rules would be something that would make it very easy for you to get data from China to Hong Kong, but then most likely, if you want to transfer the data out of Hong Kong, you have to comply with the requirements of the Chinese law. At least that was my assumption. However, the Memorandum of Understanding has not been published. Nobody knows what it says. We just know it exists. And then a news story broke at the end of last week saying that now there's some disagreement between the parties, the Chinese parties, the Hong Kong parties, as to how this should actually work, which means that we may never see the light of day of these rules. We may find that we still end up in this very odd limbo where if you are an organization operating in China, you can't transfer your Chinese data to Hong Kong or indeed to anywhere else in the world without jumping through the various administrative hoops, which are quite nefarious. And if you get it wrong, if you're transferring data anyway, which I think a lot of organizations are, then what will happen is you may face massive fines in China, you may have your business shut down, you could even face criminal penalties. And this is a real fear, because at the moment, if you've been reading the news, there's lots of concerns for Western businesses who are operating in China. And they are concerned that they are going to get shut down. We've had some businesses, consultancies mainly raided, often on the auspices of national security law reasons, but also there's a concern as to how much data they're collecting and sending elsewhere. And it's created this real issue in China, and certainly lots of my colleagues and people that I know who operate in China are wondering much longer they can wait there, how they can last. But it's also really harming Hong Kong. So for Hong Kong, like I said earlier, it is part of China, but it's traditionally been the separate jurisdiction. It was a gateway to China, and it feels like it may become a gateway to China again relatively soon, given that China seems to be closing its borders a little bit in terms of data and I suppose in terms of commerce as well. But the concern is that if China and Hong Kong are treated the same, essentially if your data cannot be sent to Hong Kong because there's no advantage, or if they're treated the same and that all of the rules apply in China as apply in Hong Kong, then Hong Kong loses its competitiveness and everyone just moves to Singapore. And that's kind of what we're seeing at the moment. Not necessarily with good reason. People quote the national security law and they say problems with data. You've got the same problems with data in Singapore, quite frankly. But also because it's quite easy to just say, well, we're giving up on Hong Kong because of the uncertainty. Now, this is a massive problem for Hong Kong, but I'm not actually going to talk about that. It's also a massive problem for China, because China has a data problem. Now you may be wondering what I think. China lives on data, but data is very tightly controlled within China. So if you're collecting data, as I've said, you've got to comply with various requirements, fair enough. But also it controls very carefully what data goes out of its borders. It's very concerned about Chinese data falling to the wrong hands. The words national security seem to appear on almost every speech we hear by a Chinese minister, and indeed it seems to be the same now in Hong Kong. But they actually need a lot of data for their ambitions. Because what China's trying to focus on, and if you've been reading the news about the sheer incredible amount of money they've spent on NVIDIA built a artificial intelligence supporting chips and technology, they're trying to make sure that they are a leader in artificial intelligence. But if you look at some of the big leads at the moment, you've got OpenAI, who have their own problems but are huge. So Microsoft in partnership with OpenAI, Google, Meta, who is sort of the wild card in all this. They are all Western-based, Western-operated companies. Now, China has its own internet, run ostensibly with its own versions of Western technology, but some of which are far more advanced. If you've ever used WeChat, you're thinking, wow, it can do everything on this. That's kind of the point. All of the data is stored in one place, and that's all accessible to the Chinese government. But they need lots of data, and not just data in terms of what they get out of China itself, its homegrown stuff, in order to really train that AI and make it work and be competitive with the rest of the world. So we've got this thing where data is tightly controlled. Hong Kong, which would be a great way for China to get hold of data going into China, coming via Hong Kong, whether it may be data relating to Western businesses or anything else, that is now being, I suppose, almost throttled by the fact that businesses aren't sure whether they should treat China and Hong Kong as the same thing, or they're moving to Singapore. And also people are now concerned about whether they just send their data to China anyway. There's a massive kickback against TikTok. We're now seeing some of a kickback, but not as bad as against some of the big Chinese retailers, online retailers who operate in the West. And I don't really know how China's going to solve this. Now, my advice, not that I think anyone in China or any policymaker would be listening, would be to solve this big data problem, would be actually make sure that Hong Kong is treated the same way as China in terms of how you can get data in and out of Hong Kong, and the West can carry on doing business in Hong Kong. Hong Kong retains its reputation that it's kind of tarnished as a gateway to China, and everything carries on. China will inevitably get access to Western data it wants for AI training purposes, and indeed will probably remain on the world stage in terms of technology. But I think unless something changes dramatically soon, I think we're a bit stuck. So this is kind of a plea. Whoever it is who's working on the memorandum of understanding in terms of data transfer between Hong Kong and China and back again, pull your finger out and agree something. We've had now almost 2 years since these data laws came into force, and I could pretty much draft what you need to do myself, as could I think any other technology lawyer based in Hong Kong or indeed China. And I don't think it's rocket science, but without it, China is facing a massive strategic disadvantage, and any company operating in the West is having to jump through hoop after hoop, often wondering what it needs to do. And unfortunately, in the current climate, the view is, well, it's so difficult now to deal with Hong Kong data and China data coming into Hong Kong and transferring data back into China, that we'll pull out. In fact, some organizations are becoming so paranoid now that they are separating and hiving off China and then Hong Kong too, which is the problem, certainly for those who are operating in West Business in Hong Kong, as separate jurisdictions, as separate, essentially, data hubs. So the data from the rest of the organization, if you're operating with US data, UK data, EU data, whatever, that cannot be transferred to the Hong Kong or China businesses or offices for fear that it will go into China. And that level of paranoia, which frankly has been brought on by the uncertainty surrounding these rules, means it makes people very wary of doing business in China, wary of doing business in Hong Kong, and ultimately will be a wake-up call. It's certainly giving a lot of money to people in Singapore, particularly landlords, it seems. They seem to be putting the rent up awfully a lot for people who have moved there. So that's kind of my view. The solution to this is so easy. Just publish the framework and give us some rules. There'll be more confidence in how data can transfer between Hong Kong and China. Your AI ambitions will hopefully be realized. We will have a foundation for those businesses who run on data, not just AI run businesses, to actually operate in Hong Kong and thrive this greater Bay Area metropolis, this whole technology hub. But if we carry on the view that now data has to be strictly controlled and it can't be transferred, just a couple of miles away, the Chinese border is really just slightly north of me, then I think we are stuck. And the only people who are going to make any money are data lawyers trying to navigate this mess. So there we go. That's my thought for a very hot August day. I'm sweating already sitting here without air conditioning talking about law. But I suppose if you can't sweat talking about law, what can you sweat talking about? On that positive note, if you have any questions, do let me know. We will see what happens. I will do a proper video on the Memorandum of Understanding when I finally see what it says. But rather than just hinting at it at the beginning of videos, until we actually get some concrete proof on what it's going to be, I'm not going to say any more. I'm just going to be very annoyed that it's not forthcoming, because it's such an easy thing, an easy problem to solve. Anyway, that's it for the moment. Enjoy your summer. I will be back very soon in a slightly new role, which will be quite interesting. We'll see what happens there, but I won't tell anything about that. You'll find about that probably in my next video. But that's it for the moment. Have a good one. I'll see you soon.